government has failed miserably in providing a clear framework for ethical teaching. If you look at the way our education system is divided, it's between private school, grammar school, and state school. State school is at the bottom of the pile, private school is the top. Why should the state school be left to rot? Why shouldn't the state schools have the same funding? Why shouldn't we invest in good schools, good teachers, and good environment for our kids to become better?
Well, let's talk about education. Let's take it away from the...
Douglas Murray and Myriam François, a Muslim convert, engage in a fiery debate on whether the British should stop tolerating intolerance. The issue is multifaceted, touching on free speech, hate speech, political intolerance, and particularly religious and cultural intolerance. Britain's approach to tolerance is scrutinized, with some arguing that it has contributed to the rise of extremism. This debate offers a critical look at the balance between tolerance and the fight against radicalism.
I think schools should be vetting the people who speak to children much more closely than clearly they have been. But I do take issue with the idea that this reflects some sort of radicalisation because some overzealous governors are wanting to impose social conservative mores within the school. I think the problem really is to do with the fact that this government and the government before it, in fact, has allowed schools to develop a much more independent ethos. And in fact, that allows academies and free schools to give governors a much greater say in how schools are run, in the ethos, in even how the curriculum is defined to some extent. So in doing so, it is effectively saying to communities, you can define your local ethos according to your own views. But then when it doesn't like the way in which communities form their own ethos, form their own curriculums...
That's what I meant by the sort of Govian principles.
It is absolutely Govian principles. And to be fair, the other issue is that this government really is playing a double speak here. It can't, on one hand, talk about the issue of cultural isolation and support faith schools. Faith schools develop all sorts of forms of cultural isolation. That isn't to say they should be promoted in any secular schools, but to suggest that's a form of extremism suggests this government is actually supporting forms of extremism in faith schools.
The letter detailed how a group of extremists aim to take control of school governing bodies, pushing for an educational environment that aligned with their beliefs. This included prioritising Islamic teachings over the national curriculum, segregating genders, and promoting a more rigid interpretation of Islam. The allegations sparked a national outcry and led to multiple investigations, uncovering evidence of inappropriate practices and undue influence in some schools.
It should reflect the nature of the school.
So first they came for the tombolas.
For what?
Look, the problem
gambling
going on
wrong
here,
in those communities.
The problem going on here is we're in the middle of a debate. I mean, the nation is going through something very substantial change, and I think that what we've been discussing in recent days and what we've been discussing this morning kind of reflects this. I mean, until very recently, you know, if you said to people, and it comes back to the British values thing as well, if you said to people until very recently, what is Britain, what are British values, you'd have got a fairly clear reply along the lines of, you know, a Protestant Christian country, we have institutions of church and state and monarchy and so on, which represent the country. As one of the results of mass immigration of recent decades, there has been a substantial change in the country. All sorts of good things have come from that, and some negatives have. But one of the things that has come from it is this confusion about what it is we are. We want to be open and tolerant, we want people to be able to practice their faiths, we want people to be able to express themselves and live the lives they want to live. What we're finding it very hard to do at the moment, and I mean the French secular example has already come up, is to work out where our lines are drawn as a nation, because they're not clear at the moment.
It's impossible to draw those lines, isn't it?
It may prove impossible. It may be that we do something like the French state did and try to draw very clear lines. That's what you've heard in recent days. There's a bit of it already this morning, that, you know, there's a problem with some schools that are actually, you know, state secular schools that happen to have had...
How bad are these problems?
The problems exposed in Sir Michael Wolfshaw's report are pretty serious, and there's more to come.
Really, what's so serious in the report?
I think, for instance, I mean, Wiltshire himself says that these children are at risk of cultural isolation. There have been findings of children, for instance, being taught in assembly to chant anti-Christian chants and so on. This is very unpleasant sectarian stuff.
Do you know that none of the kids were spoken to?
But if
Myriam François, in her debate with Douglas Murray, argues that the British government's policies contribute to the problem. She claims that government support for faith schools fosters segregation, which can eventually lead to social disintegration. integration. François believes that while some teachings may seem radical, the blame lies with the government's double standards. She argues that the government's inclusive approach inadvertently supports extremism by not taking a firmer stance against radical elements within these faith schools. François also points out that the British government's tolerance extends to various changes within the country, including mass immigration and religious propaganda. She contends that this tolerance, while well-intentioned, has opened the door for extremist ideologies to take root. By supporting faith schools without stringent oversight, the government has allowed a parallel education system to develop where radical teachings can flourish unnoticed.
This is part one. By the way, just very quickly on this matter of this, I mean, I do think that one of the things...
But address that issue about...
Okay, can I just mention first, one of the interesting things that's come up in recent days and weeks, I think, over this whole Trojan horse business, is I think that some Muslims in this country, in particular a lot of Muslim spokespeople, a lot of Muslim groups have been furious about these revelations and are now denying them. They're still denying them. And this is something like happened in the Catholic Church over the paedophilia scandal. People just don't want to admit it. They don't want dirty laundry to be aired in public. They genuinely think that... And that's why there's still this denial, even now. There's an official report by Sir Michael Wilshaw. It's found some very disturbing things. Some people still think that they don't exist. Do you think it's all been made up?
What I actually know is that there are serious governance issues. There have been internal administrative issues. Whether there are issues of extremism, which is what you're peddling, and what, in fact, the publication you work for is peddling by publishing one of the worst covers in this country that I have ever seen, suggesting that young children are vehicles for extremism and terrorism. You should be ashamed to be associated.
Can I just give, this is a very good example of the problem. Miriam, you are a very prominent spokesperson. You're a voice. You're a very prominent convert to Islam. You have a voice.
I don't call myself a convert. So don't call me one.
Whatever it is you want to call yourself. You have a voice. Here are some problems that are coming up, which have been exposed in schools, that seem to be teaching very seriously unpleasant things, and they're being taught by some extremist Muslims. Why, in this debate, you first of all deny that that is going on, and secondly, think the problem is a spectator cover cartoon.
I've never denied that there are issues.
I do not understand.
On these
the problem is not the spectator cover.
I think the issue is you're
Myriam first. I want to speak to Daniel Hannan. Myriam, respond to that.
You're trying to suggest what you're trying to do is support the Gove's agenda here, which is there are absolutely issues within these schools, and I think everyone, including the Hands Off Birmingham School campaign and others, have acknowledged that there are certain people who should even stand down as a consequence of some of the revelations in this report and reports that will come. The issue, however, is trying to rebrand this as an issue of extremism in order to expand this idea of extremism being non-violent ideas.
Or indeed Nick Griffin had been asked to come along and speak.
Douglas Murray counters François' arguments with a strong emphasis on the facts. He highlights the reality of extremist teachings in some Muslim schools, which François attempts to downplay. Murray argues that the British government's tolerance has indeed allowed for the spread of radical ideologies. He points to undeniable evidence of extremist teachings, such as those uncovered in the Trojan horse affair, where young students were taught to prioritise death over life. Murray asserts that the British government has been too lenient, tolerating changes that have had detrimental effects on society. This includes not only religious propaganda, but also the broader impact of mass immigration. He argues that this tolerance has led to the creation of isolated communities where extremist views can thrive, contributing to both violent and non-violent extremism.
What is one of the greatest moments in Christian scripture, but the moment when Jesus has brought to him the woman who was caught in adultery? And what does Jesus say when the crowd wanted to stone her for her sins? He says, "He who is without sin cast the first stone." And the crowd go away. Now, in the Islamic tradition, a very, very similar thing happens when a woman is brought to Muhammad and he has her stoned. So, history of Christianity, more bloody or less bloody? If Jesus was more like Muhammad? I think everyone would say likely to be more bloody. There are enlightened traditions within certain Muslim traditions, certain ones. They tend, by the way, to be highly prejudiced against by other Muslims. I'm thinking of things like the Ahmadiyya community, certain branches of Sufi Islam, which have very admirable attitudes towards enlightenment and a sort of syncretic belief of their own. But these are minority sects within Islam and are largely hated by other Muslims. Islam is about subjugation to Allah. And that's why, one of the reasons why the Muslim world is as it is. The Christian world is as it is because of the legacy of Christianity. I mean, it's from Christianity that we get the idea of rights. Why do I say that? Because even the framers of the European Constitution pretty much knew this. Certainly the framers of the UN Declaration on Human Rights knew this. Certainly the founding fathers of the United States knew this. That the reason why all men are regarded as equal is because all of mankind is created equal by God. And that that people may be different in their lives, and we're all different in our lives, and you may be a car mechanic or a king, but that we're all the same. We're all the same in the eyes of God, in the eyes of the Creator. Nobody to that extent has the ability to be, is by nature better or worse than anyone else. It's the adventure of their lives to try to be better. But all of these ideas, like the dignity of the individual, these come from the Judeo-Christian tradition. And without them, we would be, like China, or like the Islamic world, or like anywhere else. If we had a different tradition in our past, we would be in a different place now. But this was our tradition. This is our tradition. And anyone who thinks that what I've just described is as water is to fish is making a vast category error.
If I may make this observation, one of the things that has really struck me over the last decade, as there's been a lot of soul searching in the West amongst leading thinkers, is that even people of no belief, I mean, I am plainly Christian in terms of my personal convictions. And one of the reasons, by the way, is that I think justice really matters. I don't think you can have love without justice. It's impossible. So the people who have done these frightful things, I believe they want to be called to account one day. Otherwise, you're saying the lives of the people they've butchered are as nothing. There'll be no justice in this life for them. That's important for me personally. But that wasn't my real point. My real point was that there are a lot of people who don't personally believe, have personally come to the view there's no God or they don't believe in the Christian God, but are able to see intellectually the unbelievable importance of Christianity to what Churchill, I think, as a non-believer, would have called the benefits of civilizational Christianity. And that if we're not careful, if we continue denying that, we'll just be left with nothing, no wellspring, nothing to cling to. That's just narrow materialism.
There's this idea that Western civilization is like a cut flower and you can look at it and enjoy it, but it's going to die.
Yeah.
So how do we make sure that it isn't a cut flower? And the answer to that is, of course, we find the seeds that planted the flowers and we reseed the land. We replant the flowers, the trees and the bushes of our culture and of our civilization. And that's what we should do. That will be part of the task ahead. And that doesn't mean the dogmatic re-Christianization, although some people might like to go that route, but it does mean a recognition of the wellsprings. And, without that, nothing good can come. Without that, we will simply be a flower that withers and dies.
The debate between Murray and François brings to light the complex nature of tolerance and intolerance. On one hand, tolerance is a fundamental value in democratic societies, promoting diversity and inclusivity. On the other hand, unchecked tolerance can enable extremist ideologies to spread, posing a threat to social cohesion and national security. The balance between tolerance and intolerance is delicate. Governments must navigate this terrain carefully, ensuring that they uphold the values of inclusivity and diversity while also protecting society from the dangers of radicalism. This involves stringent oversight of educational institutions, particularly faith schools, to prevent the dissemination of extremist teachings.
My guest tonight is a neoconservative writer who's in the country for the Australian Think Inc. event Polarised alongside Dr. Cornel West. His book is The Strange Death of Europe, Immigration, Identity, Islam.
We do have a problem. We have a problem when the failures of Islam throughout the world, the failures of all Islamic societies come here into Britain. their intolerance of freedom of conscience, their intolerance of apostates, their intolerance of freedom of expression and freedom of speech.
Truth is, the great disappointment of the last 14 years has been that civil society has failed, that we can't do the things to the Islamists that we would do, as I referred to the neo-Nazis.
Please welcome Douglas Murray, everybody. Hello. Welcome, Douglas. Thanks for coming on the show. I know you're very concerned about Western civilization. This show is technically part of the Western canon. Yeah. Thoughts?
Yeah, the decline in a nutshell.
Well, that's a show. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it very much. I just need to make a disclaimer at the top. Myself and the executive producer of this program, Dan Illich, are involved in your tour with Dr. Cornel West in the country. That was separate to the decision to book you on the show. We haven't been bribed into having a neoconservative on the ABC, but I need to put that out there. If people aren't familiar with your work, what is this strange death of Europe that you refer to?
Well, for many years I've travelled as a reporter, as a journalist across the Third World and Middle East, Africa, many of the war zones of these areas, seen many of the places where people are fleeing from. And in 2015, I was reporting from across my continent, across Europe, when people were coming in unprecedented numbers. We were talking about the German population taking in an additional 2% in a single year alone, where basically the German Chancellor said anyone who makes it to Europe can come. And I saw all of this firsthand, and I realized that there was a catastrophe in the making, a catastrophe which I think has already started to unfurl in the years since. I realized this is just a version of a problem that every country is having to think about. And we're very lucky countries, yours and mine. We're countries that people want to come to. And that isn't an easy thing to deal with, because we know that we cannot take in the world, and yet we can't have the conversation about what we can do. And I thought that we need to think about this much more deeply than we are.
The political consequences of that decision sort of flowing through Germany and affecting Angela Merkel, some changes seem to be happening. They're trying to get more agreements with North African countries and looking at trying to return some people to where they came from.
Bribed Turkey.
Right.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen?
Well, we already know some of the consequences. German elections saw a party that's generally described as far-right, the AfD, is now the main party of opposition in the German parliament. Unbelievable social problems, unbelievable problems with freedom of expression. I mean, another data law just came in at the beginning of this year that tries to stop German citizens saying very critical things about their government on social media. And I just, you know, who could predict any problem from, for instance, suppressing the rage of the German people? Who could foresee any downside to that, you know?
Not me. All good. Okay. What do you think should happen now to address this situation?
Look, I just, as I say, we have to think about this much more seriously and deeply than we've been thinking about it. A lot of people make a lot of very easy social capital, including a lot of politicians make very easy social capital by basically saying, we're generous, we're open, let them come. They quote John Lennon quite often. And this is cheap and too easy, and it's not up to the task in hand. We have to be able to think about the speed of immigration, the type of immigration we do want, and that means the type of immigration that we just don't need more of. These are really ugly and difficult conversations to have, but it's my belief that if we don't have them, other people will have them, and very bad people will have them. I'm not willing to hand that terrain over. Just not willing to do it.
That ugliness is certainly something we're wrestling with in this country. We always have with immigration in Australia, and now our population has hit 25 million people. Some people are concerned solely by the numbers of immigration that we have, others by the makeup of that immigration. Sure. Some are concerned by both. You talk about how London is a minority white city at the moment. Yeah. It's currently reached that point. In the future, there are predictions that the UK and America will become minority white countries. And I guess when I hear those phrases or those concerns, or when I hear people say phrases like, this part of Sydney doesn't look like how Australia is supposed to look, that makes me feel very nervous.
Yeah, rightly.
It makes me wonder, what are these countries supposed to look like, and who gets to decide that?
Sure. Well, it should be decided by governments which should be accountable to the people. And if the people want such a change to happen, then you can do it. The problem I identify across Europe is that it happens in the face of public hopes and public desire, where the politicians end up berating the public rather than trying to listen to them or trying to answer them. And this, again,
is a problem that is just exploding everywhere. Look at...
Education plays a crucial role in this debate. Schools are not just places of learning, they are also where values and beliefs are shaped. The Trojan Horse affair highlighted the potential for extremist ideologies to infiltrate the education system, emphasising the need for robust measures to ensure that schools promote inclusive and balanced teachings. Governments must ensure that faith schools, while allowed to teach religious principles, adhere to national educational standards and promote values of tolerance and respect. This includes regular inspections and oversight to detect and address any signs of radicalism. It also involves supporting initiatives that encourage integration and mutual understanding among students of different backgrounds. Mass immigration is another critical aspect of this debate. While immigration brings diversity and economic benefits, it can also lead to social tensions if not managed properly. Rapid and large-scale immigration can create isolated communities where integration is challenging, providing fertile ground for extremist ideologies to take root.
Italy is one of the founding members of the EU. It's a massively important economy in Europe. And the public there are so angry that they just voted into a government, a party, again, that is generally described as far-right, the League, and a party founded by a comedian, the Five Star Movement, which literally doesn't know what it wants to do. It is a protest vote that has become government, okay? I mean, you can say all sorts of things and make a lot of jokes about Italian politics, but it literally being run by comedians is
Sounds fucking awesome, I gotta say.
You should look into this as a career move.
Would anyone vote for me? Well, that was reluctant. What about the way these conversations and the way they affect immigrants who are already here? We could close the borders tomorrow and let nobody in left. There is a huge immigrant population in Australia. The phrase, a country built by immigrants is regularly used since the White Australia policy thing, since we wrapped that up.
It depends what you mean by immigrants in Australia. I mean,
sure.
What do you mean when you say that?
Immigrants, people who have immigrated post the White Australia policy. I think certainly that's a big part of it, of what we make up the immigrant population. But indeed,
because it's an important question. I mean, is somebody an immigrant once they become a citizen? I'd say not.
They cease to be an immigrant.
They cease to be an immigrant. Once you're a citizen, you're not an immigrant anymore.
Right.
You're an Australian.
Yeah. Well, there are plenty of citizens, people who are born and raised from, say, the Sudanese community in Australia. There's a lot of focus on that particular immigrant community in Melbourne at the moment.
Because of the home invasion.
There are some issues surrounding the overrepresentation of that community in crime statistics. This video went a little bit viral on Vice Australia last week. This is some Sudanese youth recounting some of the feedback and some of the conversation that's happening online at the moment when it comes to their community.
What more do you want? You people in Canberra, this is our country. Please send them back. They don't deserve to be here, and they are used to fighting and destroying other people's businesses, lives, and homes. For God's sake, can't you see what is happening? We will be taken over by them, and that is for sure. You are a bunch of idiots if you don't see this happening. I say concealed firearms should be considered in Australia. If they're that much of a danger, they should be shot.
I mean, how do we have this conversation without that kind of shit happening?
Well, look, that's just a risk you're going to have to take, isn't it? Because the alternative is you shut everyone up, which isn't going to work. You're not going to be able to tell people don't speak about things, because they may not speak about things, but they'll keep thinking things. And it's much better that you know what they're thinking than that everyone hides it from you. It's going to be a lot better in the long term. But this points exactly to the centre of a conundrum, which is there are specific issues that specific communities bring, undoubtedly. There are specific benefits that the communities bring, undoubtedly, and specific downsides. One thing which I've seen this throughout Europe. If, for instance, people flee a specific war zone, for instance, Somalia, speak to anyone who's fled Somalia in recent years. They have seen things that you can't imagine. Now, it's very likely these people also are going to have a different attitude toward violence as a result. And we have seen this in gangs in London in recent years. A Somali gang moves into an area and they are willing to do things that other gangs won't do, and that causes a rise in violence, gang to gang to gang. Okay. That doesn't mean you don't invite any Somalis. It doesn't mean you don't have any asylum policy. But, you're a damn fool if you're not going to think about that and find some way to address it, because otherwise you leave it to people to start gestating and becoming vile and becoming angry against everybody. So, this is the central stupidity of the assumption of multiculturalists who believe in that not as an idea, but as a
policy, that you make things multicultural. The central problem they keep on coming to is this. They think in a diverse society, we should hear less views. We should clamp down on views. Look, the more diverse your society, the more views you're going to have to hear. Get used to it. And some of that's going to be really ugly and unpleasant. Well, as I say, what are your alternatives? Because shutting up cannot be one of them.
Well, if you'd like to catch Douglas Murray and hear more of his views, you can catch him in Dr. Corner West in Melbourne tomorrow, Sydney on Wednesday, and in Brisbane on August 19th. Thanks very much for being here. Please thank him, Douglas Murray, everybody.
Murray argues that the British government's approach to immigration has been too permissive, allowing for the development of parallel societies. These isolated communities can become breeding grounds for radicalism, as they are often disconnected from mainstream society and more susceptible to extremist influences. Addressing extremism requires a multifaceted approach. It involves not only stringent oversight of educational institutions and immigration policies, but also proactive measures to promote social integration. This includes initiatives to foster dialogue and understanding between different communities, ensuring that immigrants are encouraged and supported to integrate into mainstream society. Governments must also tackle the root causes of extremism, such as social and economic inequalities, by providing opportunities for education and employment. By addressing these underlying issues, governments can reduce the appeal of extremist ideologies and promote a more inclusive and cohesive society. The debate also touches on the issue of free speech versus hate speech. While free speech is a cornerstone of democratic societies, it is not absolute. Governments must balance the right to free speech with the need to protect society from hate speech and extremist propaganda. This involves enacting and enforcing laws that prohibit hate speech while ensuring that these laws do not stifle legitimate expression and debate. It also requires vigilance in monitoring and countering extremist content online, where radical ideologies can spread rapidly. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and for more content like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel.